hard gainers, natural bodybuilding, nutrition, recovery, weight management, skin health, hormones, biohacking. Welcome to the Joshua Lappin Fitness Podcast. Lee Chambers is an environmental psychologist, performance nutritionist, and sleep expert. Lee has faced and overcome many challenges. Early in life, he developed a devastating disease that temporarily prevented his ability to walk. Lee fought back and learned to walk again, but this time with a vision and purpose. Inspired to help others, he founded Centralized Functional Life Coaching, a business focused on life coaching, workplace well-being, and business coaching services. Lee lives in Preston, Lancashire, United Kingdom, with his wife and 2 children. When not boosting employee well-being, he enjoys coaching a disability football team, reading thought-provoking books, and walking in nature. Well, good morning, Lee, and welcome to the Joshua Lappin Fitness Show. Hope you're doing well today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Josh. It's a pleasure to speak.
Definitely. How are things going for you this week?
This week's been quite busy, and it's a challenging time with everything that's going on at the minute. A number of clients and different projects, and yet, when we try and make a difference, it doesn't feel like work so much, but it's quite energizing being out there and trying to make an impact.
Definitely. How has the COVID kind of impacted your business?
So what's kind of happened is there's a number of different aspects it's changed. We did originally have a digital hybrid delivery with part digital, part physical. And obviously the digital aspect has considerably overtaken the physical now going forward. But in so many ways, it's slightly changed some of the aspects of what we do. So our coaching clients, they've got, different issues and slightly different challenges that they're now looking to overcome. In terms of workplace well-being, that's changed considerably. So there's a lot more working around helping remote workers bolster their mental health and build their own workplace environments at home. As that has changed, slightly less around the office design and environmental psychology of offices. And yet now that offices are reopening with different density levels and different health and safety setups, now I'm starting to be involved in that again. And that's kind of expanded now, and I'm doing some stuff around careers and some stuff around the consciousness of leadership, emotional intelligence, and starting to look at how diversity and inclusion can be woven in to well-being in a wider picture.
Yeah, that's very interesting. If you don't mind, since we're kind of at the beginning here, if you don't mind just giving us a little bit of background on kind of yourself and your business and how you came to be in this kind of space.
Yeah, so it's been a long journey. So I grew up in the north of the UK, and my parents are both blue collar workers with a real hard work ethic. And they identified that quite young I was academically gifted and was doing well in the school system. And throughout school, my grades were high, and I wasn't really putting much effort in because I was quite lazy, if I'm honest, at the same time. And yet I was always quite curious and a little bit disruptive, and generally found that I wanted to kind of understand myself, understand the world a bit better. I was the first one in my whole family to go to university, so that was obviously something that was celebrated, and I studied international business psychology. So I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I liked understanding people, I liked business, but I also liked data and statistics, and studying that allowed me to do a lot of different units that started to help me shape what I might want to do. But at university, I started to struggle in the second year a bit around my own mental health. Found that I didn't have the emotional intelligence and the self-awareness to dig deeper to find out who I was as I moved through that adolescent to adult transition. I hadn't had a lot of, deep conversations with my own father about my masculinity, and looked out to society, people who looked like me. They were sportsmen, they were in films and music, but that wasn't me. I was more of a businessman / scientist, somewhere in the middle of that, and didn't have a reference point in society to pull from. So I started to try and dig a bit deeper into myself, and just found I didn't have the tools to do that. And that challenges around, struggling a bit with my academic stuff. I started to isolate myself and started to struggle with my own self-care a little bit, and found myself spiraling downwards in a lot of ways, to a point where I then ended up isolating myself for 2 weeks and being taken home by my parents. So that was kind of like the first challenge that I hit in my life, and I had to go home back to my mum and dad's house and reflect on what had happened, start to learn how to move forward, and realise that actually I needed to understand myself before I could go and start to build my own, character going forward. But I managed to get back to university and graduate, and I had to try and think, what did I want to do? I like statistics and data, and I like helping people. So I decided to go into financial advisory. This was 2007. I graduated, so not the best time to go into financial advisory. 6 months of working hard, and my professional qualifications were defunded, so they won't pay for them. And I didn't have the money to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for all these qualifications that I was going to need. And then a few weeks later, I was made redundant anyway, so it didn't matter at that point. I looked at and realised there was no jobs in finance at that point, as the economic crash really bit and changed the landscape. So I had to have a think, what do I want to do? Well, I kind of anchored back into the fact that I like running businesses, and I'd run a few different businesses from the age of 12. Always been a bit entrepreneurial in spirit, and that had taught me little bits of marketing and finance and communication by trying different things as a child. At one point, I was moonlighting and selling video games through magazines back in the late 90s, and mail ordering them out, pretending that I was like an adult when actually I was 12 years old. So I've always had a bit of that streak in me. But going through university, I kind of dropped that and gone and thought I'll go and get a career. But obviously, suddenly that's been wiped out, and I ended up setting up a video game business that was working in e-commerce and retail, and that really took off and went up to 6-figure revenue in the first year. But I was working in local government as well, because I still wanted to shape my own career and decide what I wanted to do. And that kind of took me through a process where the video game company kept doubling in revenue year on year for the first few years, and that allowed me to go out and buy my first house and start to do different qualifications that I could pay for, so they couldn't be taken and defunded from me. And really the idea behind the business was that I can't make myself redundant from my own business, or at least I can in the future, and it'll be my choice. So after doing a number of different qualifications in nutrition, in strength and conditioning, and then in soccer coaching, I then got to a point where I was like, I might want to utilize these qualifications. I ended up changing job at the local government and going into helping unemployed people, finding what they wanted to do, what industry they wanted to go into, and helping them build the confidence and communication skills to go and express that interview. And that felt really good, taking them on that journey. And that in some ways became a little bit of the framework for what would become the life coaching part of Centralized going forward. I then also spent 6 months working in elite sport, so working in sports psychology and sports nutrition, which opened my eyes to the amazing levels of performance, the experimentation, the cutting edge science that's used, but also made me realise that all that money and time and effort that's spent for those marginal gains and incremental improvements would be better spent down in society to make difference to thousands and thousands of people. And then in 2014, obviously this is becoming quite a long story of my own life, but I lost the ability to walk for illness. Over the course of 5 days, my immune system started to attack my joints, locking them in place and leaving me in hospital, which was a challenging time. My son was 18 months old, my wife was 6 months pregnant, and I battled through that challenge. I had to learn to walk again. That was in itself an experience, but I was proactive in my recovery. I was resilient. I attacked the disease I had as much as it attacked me. Still got that disease today. And yeah, after 11 months, I got back on my feet and was walking unaided. And through that became, again, another chiseling factor in me wanting to set up a company that helped people to break through limits, push boundaries, and really start to prioritize their own health and the behaviors to look at, building themselves into a human being that was more resilient and that was more connected to the person that they wanted to become and understand going forward. And that really then fueled me. I was back up and mobile again. And that made me decide that I was going to spend a bit of time running the video game business, spending time with my children before they started school. And when my daughter started school last year, I launched Centralized, which is a workplace wellbeing company with a life coaching element. So life coaching for the individuals, workplace wellbeing inside companies. And I bring that to the table today. And really, my desire is to impact the health and well-being of thousands of people by going out there and increasing awareness, helping people engage in more healthy behaviors and starting to look at how their environments affect them and how the responsibility of leaders to ensure that the workers are in environments that are healthy, that are regenerative, and starting to look at how companies can embed these processes into businesses so that I don't need to be there, on my soapbox saying it, but it starts to grow internally through community, through policy, through strategy, and through process.
Tell us a little bit about kind of what an environmental psychologist does, or how does one person kind of get to that career?
Yeah, so I think the best way to kind of segment it for people is that there's three significant pillars. So the first pillar works around urban design and planning and how that can be harnessed to channel different behaviors, interactions, and improve well-being. So that's the area where I'm significantly in terms of office design. There's also people in that section who work on design of homes, design of green spaces, design of transport networks and cities. And as you can imagine, you tend to work with town planners, architects, transport network designers, and you're working with interior designers, facilities managers, and installing and designing elements and looking at how humans are going to interact, feel, think, and behave in those spaces. The second group of contemporaries that I work with and in tandem with is the environmental psychologists who have a focus on nature, natural interactions, natural spaces, and how we, gain from being in natural environments, but also how being in natural environments then influences humans' behavior. And they'll look at the differences between people who live in urban and live in natural environments and look how access to nature affects health outcomes and psychological aspects of human behavior. And the final group looks specifically at environmental behavior. So how it can be influenced through policy, through social norms, through group theory, through values, but also look how some of the more complex aspects of behavior, such as one person being incredibly afraid of climate change and someone who lives not that far away thinking it doesn't exist, and how you navigate behaviors and policies when there's wide spectrums, when people are scared of earthquakes and some people live in somewhere where there's never been an earthquake, so you can never really appreciate those elements, where some people live in where in 10 years their home, the place where they've always been, might be underwater, and how that then affects their future health, where they might have to migrate to, and helping people understand that you might not see it in your everyday life, and yet what's happening with the oceans, what's happening with land, what's happening with forests, it affects all of us in a wide ranging way. And that in so many ways, giving people scientific studies, they're not going to read it and absorb that. People learn differently and take on data in different ways. So for some people, they would understand an infographic. Some people would see comparison pictures better. And it's just about understanding why people behave pro-environmentally. So it's looking at why some areas are full of litter while some aren't, and looking at what might be causing that, what affects people's environmental behavior, and how do they propagate that onto other people.
speaking of kind of the office environment and structure and setup of offices, I've come across uh, several different studies that kind of looked at um, basically debating the theory of like an open workspace versus having kind of your own individual private area. In your kind of work and experience, um, what have you seen as regards to people's productivity and performance when you put them in each of those environments?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at the studies and the evidence-based design, you start to get you can start to get a clear picture. And yet, the more I've kind of gone into the actionable side of things, everyone has a different environmental need. And what my work really surrounds is the fact that for some people, they prefer a lighter workspace with less noise, less density of other employees, and more ventilation. Someone who sits next to them needs the complete opposite. They have very different environmental needs. And so often, an office space is designed by architects and interior designers who've been to design school, who've learnt philosophies, who resonate with some and not others. But they take that knowledge and those research-based methods, but those, more traditional design elements, and fuse them with their own thoughts and feelings. They then create a design that then goes to a board. That board don't spend time in that room. They sign it off. Goes to the financiers who agree the budget. Budget's signed off. Do those financiers work in that room? Nope. It then goes through and, it's signed off by the board, finances in place, gets installed by facilities and external contractors. And then all of a sudden, someone's going to come into there and spend 8 hours of the day, 40 hours of a week, like days and days of your life in that space. And how much input they had in that process. And so often, for me, it's about going in and saying, look, we don't need to refit your whole office, but how can you get more natural light in here? How is the density of the work relevant to each individual's need and the needs of the job? How does the office flow for these people doing this work? Does it work for them? I'll go into an office of 50 employees and I'll get each of them to give me data, qualitative data on what it's like to work, what things they find useful, what things they struggle with. And what you find is 80% will bring up one point. It's really relevant. And it's something that bugs them every day. And yet they've probably gone and spoke to their manager about that. And the manager's just like, only David over here said that. And everyone else isn't saying anything. So, and when you actually take it from, a point of expertise and authority and then say, look, 40 of your employees have said this is an issue and we could spend 2 hours and completely change it. And so often in an office, people are just told, right, this is your team, sit here. But again, with people having different environmental needs, it actually becomes down to get that level where you start to get an understanding of what they need, because they will be able to articulate it. The body's an amazing feedback system. And if you're working somewhere that's too noisy, you're right next to the computer server and it doesn't resonate with you, but you could sit on the other side where it's much quieter and brighter and that works for you, then, the office can be very quickly changed with the current equipment to just whip that round and place people where they can be more productive. And then we start to look at social design elements. So looking at ways that the people who actually are there can start to impact that environment so it works more congruently for them without impacting on other people. And we start to look at biophilic elements of design as well, such as installing natural features and looking at how really the workplace flows. Like so often, one of the most comical ways is for me as a visitor to the building to walk in there and see if I can find my way around. Does it flow? Because if it doesn't flow for me as a visitor, it's not going to flow for the people who work there, because they're going to be in a place where it's not been designed with a workflow in mind. And if a visitor can't find the way around and see a logistic element to it, then most other people will also feel that same way. It creates a dissonance because the space needs to be congruent for your role. Naturally, we spend a lot of time designing our living room at home to express our authenticity and to be a place where we feel we can relax or accommodate other people, or a place to have conversations, or maybe a place where our children can have lots of fun, but it's designed with intention. And so often offices are not designed with the people, the end users' intentions in mind.
So during this kind of season of lockdown, a lot of people are doing the majority of their work from a kind of a remote area. And some people were doing that even before lockdown. How do you think working remote kind of affects the team productivity and morale?
It's definitely very challenging. And what I found from my work is, in terms of companies with more proactive, positive workplace cultures, I found it easier to keep that together. Obviously, communication is absolutely vital in almost every role nowadays. And this time has been a real challenge of management capability to keep those communication channels open. And that has required like companies setting, clear boundaries. When all of a sudden the employees have got, Slack channels, a WhatsApp group, an email trail, and there needs to be congruence in what people are communicating through what communication method to ensure that everyone is on the same page. There needs to be that kind of communication there, because it's very easy in the office when you're collaborating on a project to walk round to your colleague's desk and say, can you give me this information? I need it to process this. Then in a remote environment, you're calling them, you're video calling them, then they're not picking up. You need that. You want to make progress. And there's a lot of different challenges, especially given that for your average, from office to remote work acclimatization period, there's training, there's technological installation, there's that kind of adaptation period where people start, staggering it like a day or two, a half a day to kind of get into the scheme of things. And for most people, this happened, from full office to full remote overnight over the course of a week. And that's not much time to kind of embed these processes, to iron out the challenges, and also to start to understand how different that can be, given that a lot of our social connection for an office-based worker comes within the office, by the water tank, in the kitchen making coffees, outside at dinner time. And it's like, suddenly that's gone. In a strange way, you suddenly become more busy, but less busy. And it has given the people the opportunity to connect with intention. And yet it's quite challenging, because some jobs have a real, big social element towards them, which required, physical in-face meetings, the after work drinks and that kind of thing. And those have significantly changed when all of a sudden, your autonomy, the people you can see, the choices that you can make, and the places that you can go have vanished overnight. And suddenly you have, a fixed set of rules. And yet what I've kind of seen is that companies where managers have kept the communication channels open, they've been checking in on people, and not in a checking in, are you doing your work, but a checking in like, are you okay? How's it going? Is there any way that I can help you? Actually coaching and questioning people with a level of empathy and compassion for the fact that it's really not easy suddenly going from the office to remote working very quickly, and that no one is having an easy time, and no one sat on the couch eating chips thinking that, life is amazing. And some of the old, more traditional mindsets have had to become more flexible and more innovative. Like, I was speaking to someone at the start of lockdown, and they said that as a remote worker, like, this is absolutely not anything new for me. But when I started remote working a few years ago, a manager had said to her, remote working doesn't mean you can sit there on your chair with your TV remote and watch TV all day. And it's like those antiquated attitudes of the fact that some people, and this comes down again to environmental need, some people need to be in an office. And it's understanding that those people, they are the ones really struggling. because they are trying to find their connection and their energy that they get from meeting with other people elsewhere. But there's some people on the other side of the spectrum where they are really happy and energized in their own presence with a work schedule that fits around their life and can be designed for them. And they will absolutely thrive in these times because suddenly they've got the flexibility and the freedom to do what works best for them. And yet, for a lot of people, somewhere in the middle, few days in the office, few days remote. And this is, again, a massive experiment that wouldn't have been able to happen if, COVID hadn't have hit. And yet this is now the opportunity for companies to show that they can continue to convey their culture of helping people navigate change, of growing and developing through the medium of the internet by not just being sat in meeting room after meeting room. Sometimes decisions just need to happen. This just happened. And look how quickly people adapted and acclimatized. So in so many ways, it's been a challenge, but that challenge breeds innovation, it breeds creativity. And I kind of look in the economic crisis that made me lose my career and lost my funding for my professional qualifications. Companies like Uber and Airbnb were created in that time of challenge. Companies that can be innovative and disrupt the status quo in traditional industries. Now is the time for the next set of, startups and medium-sized enterprises to do something different, to step out of the conform into society, try something that might be like shooting for the moon. But you know what? When things are shaken up and the world is more receptive and the ears are open, it's time for you to treat your employees with respect, find out what works for them, and utilize that. You'll get the most productivity out of your employees if you give them the space to express what would work best for them.
Yeah, just going back to some points you were discussing there, I've seen various studies and research come out, at least in the US, I'm not sure about the UK, that reference a lot of people are really struggling with their mental health during this time. It would probably be a lot of those people who are used to having high levels of human interaction face to face. I know certain personality types kind of thrive off that. Do you have any tips perhaps or resources those people could kind of reference on how to deal with that?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's not just the individual, it's also the environment. So a lot of people have suddenly had to start educating their children from home and balancing the challenges of, not just themselves, but their own families and extended families, not being able to see people who, have not been well, who they support, who they care for. And when you actually look at the wider scope, people's lives have been massively disrupted. Routines and schedules have been thrown out of the window. And a lot of the anchor points for people, maybe even anchoring to taking your children into the after school clubs or doing your hobby on a Friday night, and that's not open. That disruption, it rocks our very psychological roots. And that's why there's been so many challenges, and there will, absolutely no doubt about it, be a mental health crisis that will brew and come to manifest in the next year or so due to the sheer challenge of a climate where really there's something out there that can kill you, can end your life. And there's no one who is immune from that. And from a mental health aspect, the most important thing that people can do is find ways for them to bolster their well-being through this time. And again, it's about connecting with people with intention, actually talking to people who you care about, asking them the questions. Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help you? And that will end up in a place where you get that, reciprocal ability to convey your feelings and emotions. And, when they say it's good to talk, it really is good to talk in a time like this and have an open and honest communication with people, but also to try and invest in your own self-care as much as you can through this turbulence. So looking at ways you can meditate or journal, utilize reflection practice or silence, maybe even practice gratitude, because all these things, they give you the ability to be more mindful in the moment, which helps you to then, assuage some of the anxiety and stress that we're feeling, given that the underlying elements are there because of the challenging times. Things like gratitude, hope, and optimism, they can be practiced by, diarizing, by tracking, and by thinking. And the more we actually practice these things, they're like a muscle. We start to be able to focus on them more. So the more we realize what we're grateful for, the more things that we're grateful to see. And it's about starting to see that while COVID is a massive threat, it's also a challenge for us to stand up and find a way to express ourselves, and a way for some of us to slow down and start to see, reflect on where we're going, and really anchor into the fact that for so many people, they're probably riding on a wave and walking on a path, but that might not be their path. And this is a time to actually look back and start to look back on the challenges of the past, because adversity doesn't discriminate. And COVID just shows that there's not one person in this world who's not been affected by it in some way. And we're all going to go through those periods in our life. And if we can start to have some level of acceptance towards the fact that these challenges come and they will go, and we will get to the other side more often than not, that actually we can commit to try and make the best of these difficult times, and actually start to look at ways we can, empathize with others. We can start to open our network to other people who see and understand our challenges and what we're going through. And it's so important to speak. It's so important to look after your own mind and find things that resonate with you, and things that you can do that help you get out from, those cycles of isolation, those cycles of stress, and those cycles of anxiety. And again, being able to navigate those is a skill that we can practice over time. And so many people have got out into the garden, started gardening in their outdoor space, whether it be, some plants on a balcony, or even a little display on a windowsill, or maybe, some grasslands that you have, or a yard that you can shape. And, it's important for people to ensure that they get as much exercise as is possible, because again, it has a mood boosting effect, but it also protects us against some of the elements of low mood and anxiety. Also ensuring that while a lot of people have had sleep challenges and very vivid dreams during this period, to really prioritize your sleep, because sleep is massive in our hormonal and emotional regulation. And if we can sleep well, we'll be much more resilient through this period. And just ensuring that we attempt to eat as well as we can. And it's in some ways, when our emotions are highly charged, we do make poorer food decisions. And yet what that does is it spikes our blood sugar, and 90% of our serotonin receptors are in our gut. So what we eat actually affects our neurotransmitters in our brain, and that impacts on our mood and how we see the world. And truth be told, the more positive that we see by optimizing these things, the more positivity we can see through times of challenge, the more resilient we become, and the more our mindset will allow us to see the opportunities that lie in the difficult times, and help us see the fact that we can get through it. And again, at the moment, it's very much winter in terms of our life cycles and the world around us, but summer will come again. And it's just ensuring that we weather out the winter, and we're prepared for the seasons to change and more positivity to come our way again.
During the preparation for our interview today, I was kind of researching some of your material, and to just kind of reflect a little bit on the nutritional aspect and how it impacts people. I saw that in one particular interview, you were kind of referencing how nutrition is still such a young science and it's evolving, and we still don't really know very much about this topic and the subject. And of course, there's various diets out there that people attain to or that are being promoted. So we really don't know the exact diet yet that is probably best for human beings. But kind of in your research and your experience, what do you find that works best for people in general?
So this is such a charged topic, because the more work I do in the area, the more I realise that because we're all bio-individual, because we all have our own epigenetic expression, our own microbiome, and our own gut enzyme makeup, that it's almost impossible to suggest a simple guideline diet and have people find that it truly works for them. It's much more a case of helping and empowering people to see that the belief systems are there, they are present, because the science is where it is. Any nutritional diet or belief system could find enough studies cherry-picked to be able to prove that that diet is scientifically backed, proven, and would work for everybody. And yet, when we look at the wider picture, if you look at traditional communities, such as the Maasai in Africa, they eat mainly protein from blood and meat. If you look at the traditional Mexican population, who eat almost exclusively carbs from maize and other ancient grains. And then you look out to the Inuits, who eat mainly fats from the sea, from blubber and other, sea-based products. And what you realize is they all have incredibly different macronutrient, compositions in the diets, and yet very few people in those communities have modern diseases, chronic diseases that are so prevalent in the Western world. And what you realize is that, again, over generations and generations, they have become designed to process and to, find that actually these food sources that they have survived on for thousands and thousands of years have become tailored to them. So they can have what looks like an extremely imbalanced diet, and yet nutritionally, it works for them to be, generally speaking, pretty vital in what they do on an everyday basis. And if we kind of take that back to us, we in the Western world are quite often, a mix of different people from different places as the world has evolved, as it's moved through the eras and through times have changed. But in the bigger scheme of things, 230,000 years ago, we were hunter gatherers, and we were eating whatever we could get our hands on. And the world now is completely different. You can go and get whatever you want when you want it. And I suppose in the bigger scheme of things, and obviously you in your work looking at, different body types and how in so many ways nutrition for one person, it's completely different for another. And that affects the training, it affects the performance, it affects ultimately their ability to, transcend the body type to a point and develop, the physique that they want and the body composition that they're looking to get. But from like a kind of wider and health perspective, it's about finding what works for you. The body is an amazing feedback loop. You eat something and it might taste nice and hyper palatable now, but most foods now have been made by food scientists. They are refined, they are honed, and they are designed to trigger your senses at point of consumption. And then God knows what happens inside, because you don't taste inside, except you do feel it when you listen and realize that half an hour after eating that, you don't feel great. You've got that brain fog. In fact, your blood sugar's spiked and now it's back down, you've slowed down a bit. And things just feel, I'm having this afternoon slump. It's very much related to what you eat. And the more you listen to that, the more you start to get an acuity of understanding what works for you. Now, for me, I had a mission to come off medication after becoming unwell, medication that dampens my immune system, which is toxic and it's not very nice at all. And that led me to journal for 3 years, taking individual ingredients in and out of my diet. And I don't expect any of my clients to go through that. I had a real big reason. This medication, it was not something I wanted to be on for the rest of my life. For my average client, they don't want to spend years journaling. And we're starting to get closer with nutrigenomics and starting to look at ways we can actually look at people's DNA, look at people's single nucleotide polymorphisms, and identify what people might not find to be productive for them. Again, I've got to a point where I know exactly what energizes me, exactly what I can tolerate, exactly what drains me, and exactly what sets my inflammation off. And that has been through years of testing. And yet it won't be too long in the future where we can look at people's DNA and have a good idea of that so people can start testing themselves. For the moment, though, again, go out there and experiment. That's the biggest point that I take in nutrition, because everyone wants to go out there and find the meal plan that's the answer, looking for the latest diet that works, that's going to give you energy, give you vitality, give you the body that you want, give you the clarity of mind. There is no one size fits all diet. You are an experiment. You are an experiment of one. You are the only sample of you in the world. So go out there, experiment with your nutrition, see what works. Your body will tell you, and start to eat more of what energizes you, less of what drains you, and enjoy a little bit of what you can tolerate.
I imagine that fitness is probably very similar to nutrition in the fact that each individual probably needs different types of activities to support their lifestyle and perhaps even their kind of fitness goals. Being in the work that you do and kind of working in the office environments, what do you kind of recommend for, I guess, the average office worker as far as a fitness protocol?
Yeah, so I work on it from a number of different elements. So, firstly, there's fitness as movement. So, I'm a big proponent of parking a bit further away from the office, walking in, utilizing the stairs instead of the lifts, ensuring that when you take a break, you get up from your desk and move to a different environment, a different area. Sending an email to someone on the other side, go and walk across and have a word. And obviously, that's slightly changed due to COVID, but those micro movements add up in a significant way when we're looking at from a health perspective, but also from a physiological perspective of not being sat sedentary for long periods of time, because that has a significant effect on our overall health outcomes. We then start to look at how we can implement more movement into workplaces. So again, I do a lot of work around going on walking meetings, doing walking networking, walking lunch breaks, and just getting out and utilizing outside spaces so people's senses are engaged outside. By walking and by moving, they get, the cognitive blood flow. More and more offices are incorporating some element of gym in the workplace for people to train. And again, it's about helping people's behavior to move towards that. Because so often in a workplace environment, most people don't feel like working out. It's quite an environmental shift for people to go from working on a project to working my body. Quite often people like a more significant disconnection between that. It's about how you're looking at you can inbuild those health behaviors so that people become more insistent and in bed, because so many workplace gyms have no one in there except the very few people who are already intensely engaged in their own workouts. So when looking at fitness in perspective of, again, experimentation, well, again, you will know from your work, there is no one size fits on exercise plan. And people are at different stages. People have different goals. People have different expectations, and they have different needs. So again, with exercise, there is absolutely no point in trying to plan something for someone who doesn't enjoy it very much. There's so many different forms of exercise. It's absolutely vital that people are doing something they actually quite enjoy, because that's how you get that consistency, and that's how it becomes an ingrained health behavior instead of some abstract desire they're looking to chase. It becomes more of an intrinsic motivator. And then they start to actually find that they can expand that because they already enjoy it. So they can do, 2 or 3 classes a week because that's what they like. They start to identify, that's me as a person. I do yoga, I play soccer. And it becomes part of them. Then they do it more often, do it with more consistency. And in terms of actual, exercise plans and gym work, again, there's a reason why, gyms are full of different pieces of equipment. It's for people to go out there and experiment with their own routines, because they have their own goals and aspirations that they're going to work towards. And then it's someone to kind of then help them define that and ensure that that's actually what they truly want. and then start to help them build a plan which works, that helps them incrementally start to get there, while still evolving and looking at different avenues along the way. And so often, again, people just type in fitness plan on the internet, and the first one, beginner, intermediate, advanced. Okay, so I think I'm a beginner, so I'm going to go to the gym and do this isolation exercise here, and then this compound exercise here, and they've not even shown me how to use this piece of equipment, so I'm going to sit here and have a go. And it's not productive. If you plan these things and you experiment and you find what works for you, you'll gradually get to find a place which really works. And because of my disabilities and the issues I've had around learning to walk again, suddenly there was a number of exercises I simply can't do anymore. So I've had to become more intentional in planning what I can do and looking at ways that I can work my lower body without straining it in places that I can't physically, from a nerve point of view and from a muscular point of view, actually accommodate. So suddenly you start to look more laterally rather than constantly looking up. And sometimes that's a really positive thing to do from a fitness aspect as well.
Are there any particular books or maybe websites or particular people that you study that you would recommend that people look at as a resource for this kind of information? And this could be for anything that we've talked about. Somebody who's kind of really impacted your life and you would recommend to other people.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging because I try not to funnel people towards something that would confirm the bias from what I've said, because it's so important that people look around to start to formulate their own considerations. And the more I read around, I'm like, that resonates, but that doesn't. And then I try and put it through a second lens as well, because it's easy for me to now have this belief that you got to experiment, but that has its own blind spots. So when I've kind of looked, it's challenging because I don't like people who use emotive language, especially around nutrition, telling people, this is toxic, it's poison. No. Everything is toxic and poisonous, even water and air, if you have too much of it. So yeah, actually, that's a really good question, because I tend to let people go and fall into that world and then come back with questions. Because as soon as you funnel them towards your beliefs, there's not many people out there saying experiment and find what works for you. Like when I'm consulting people on sleep, I'm one of the few people out there will say, you know what? If you've become attuned to sleeping with your telly on, then I'm not going to tell you to turn it off. Even though from a routine point of view, from a blue light point of view, from a noise disruption perspective, don't make sense. I'm realizing that you've got to a point where, you've got the TV playing in the background and that's how you fall asleep. I'm not going to change that, because that's what, if I tell you to turn it off, you'd probably be awake all night. And it's actually about helping people to see that, and then going out there and looking and coming back with questions. I think definitely the one big thing for people to look for when they're looking at these things is look at the language that's being used. Don't take scientific studies as seriously as people like to take them. And really, things will end up resonating with you. People are very good at writing content that speaks to certain people. And once that hooks you in, maybe just then you'll start to see, because in nutrition, so many people are trying to sell you something at the end. That's how you quite often know that they're trying to guide your mind down towards a certain path. And this particular supplement will do it for you. Yeah, will, every time. So yeah, I try to avoid recommending specific resources. I ask people to go out there, formulate ideas, but become more open-minded and experimental.
We're kind of approaching about the hour mark here, and I want to be respectful of your time. I always like to ask my guests, what is kind of like a parting message or an inspiring motivational quote that you would like to leave them with?
I think the biggest one for people that I would like to leave and impart is that in so many ways, the world that we're in is chasing perfection, but don't chase perfection. Perfection is the lowest possible standard you can set yourself, because you set your floor where your ceiling is and you become trapped. So instead of chasing perfection, chase connection to other human beings, to society, to the world, especially in these challenging times. It's social and human connection that will get you through the difficulties. Speak, write, communicate, and part of that connection is experimenting, talking to other people, seeing what they believe, understanding why, because everyone seems to think that everything that they think is true. And it's so easy to fall into that little hole, because really, even people who are enlightened are still the equivalent of a little man stood in a cave with a torch who can only ever see where the torch beam lands. And around you is so much more. All the answers are already inside of you. It's just about finding a way to become a shining beacon and let them answers come out. And sometimes that just requires a little bit more experimentation and a little bit more questioning rather than trying to find answers.
Where can people go to find more about you and your work, or perhaps if they wanted to connect with you?
The best place to find me would be on essentialized.co.uk, and I'm on all social platforms at Essentialized Coach.
Do you have any final parting words that you would like to say before we kind of wrap things up?
I'd just like to say thank you for having me on, Josh, and to all the listeners. Continue to experiment, continue to go out into the world and find your path, your message, what you want to bring. And when you find that, you'll find that there's lots of moments of joy, lots of challenges and obstacles to overcome. But the journey will feel like you're making a difference. And when you get towards the end of your life, you'll know that you went out there and you expressed yourself and you were you, and you won't have any regrets of the things that you didn't do, because you just stepped outside your comfort zone, experimented and tried most things and found what worked for you in the end.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. I could probably spend hours talking with you about these topics. I find every aspect of this fascinating, and I hope that other people do as well, and that they will kind of learn something from our conversation today. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to just be with us today, and best of luck to you in the future. And I hope that your work has a great impact on all your clients and all the people that you come in contact with.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. Are you looking for exercise programs that actually produce results? Maybe you're looking for nutritional products that have actually been tested and work. For more information on these exercise programs and products, please visit us at www.joshualappinfitness.com. That's JOSHUALAPPIN fitness.com.